It all started when Lisa began transforming into someone I barely recognized. We'd been married for 30 years, and for most of that time, she'd been a no-nonsense woman who couldn't care less about fashion or makeup. But about 6 months ago, she changed. Suddenly, she was dressing like she was heading to a Hollywood premiere just to buy groceries. I thought it was harmless at first, maybe even a bit charming. After all, who doesn't want their spouse to look good? But soon, it was clear that something deeper was at play. I'm John, a retired mechanic who spent decades under the hood of cars, fixing problems no one else could. Now, it seemed, I was trying to fix something far more complicated than an engine. Lisa's transformation began innocently enough. She joined a new gym, started eating healthier, and spent more time in front of the mirror. I thought she was just taking care of herself better. But then the late night started. Working out with friends, she'd say. Book club, she claimed. Yeah, right. My suspicions grew when she began guarding her phone like it was Fort Knox. Lisa had never been one for gadgets, but now, her phone was always in her hand or tucked safely away where I couldn't see it. One night, she left it on the kitchen counter while she showered. It buzzed repeatedly. Curious, I glanced at the screen. The message preview read, "Last night was incredible. Can't wait to see you again. Greg." My heart dropped. Greg was our mutual friend, a gym owner with a charisma that could charm the birds from the trees. I'd always felt a bit wary of him, but I never had a concrete reason to distrust him. Until now. I didn't open the messages, though every fiber of my being wanted to. Instead, I put the phone back and tried to act normal. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with possibilities, each more painful than the last. Was Lisa really seeing Greg? If so, why? What had I done to drive her away? The questions haunted me, gnawing at my sanity. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I needed to know the truth, no matter how ugly it might be. I decided to follow her, not in a creepy, stalker way, but just to confirm my suspicions. If she was innocent, I'd have some explaining to do. But if she wasn't, I needed to see it with my own eyes. The next day, I pretended everything was fine. I kissed Lisa goodbye as she left for her book club, and then I grabbed my keys and followed at a safe distance. It was time to uncover the truth, once and for all. My heart pounded like a sledgehammer in my chest as I followed Lisa's car down familiar roads. She drove with an ease that suggested nothing was out of the ordinary. To her, it was just another night of supposed book club, or working out with friends. But to me, it was the beginning of an unraveling I hadn't anticipated. Lisa's car pulled into Greg's driveway. I parked a few houses down, hidden from view by a line of overgrown hedges. The street was quiet, the kind of suburban silence that feels almost eerie. I watched as she stepped out of the car, dressed to the nines, and walked up to Greg's front door. It opened almost immediately, and there he was, Greg, the man I had considered a friend. He welcomed her with a kiss, not the kind you give a friend, but one filled with passion. Any lingering doubt vanished. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, struggling to keep my composure. The shock hit me first, followed quickly by a flood of anger and betrayal. How long had this been going on? How could she do this to me? And with Greg, of all people, I needed proof, something undeniable. My phone was in my hand before I knew it, fingers moving almost automatically. I started a live broadcast on social media, something I never thought I'd do. The title, Catching My Wife Cheating Live. I slipped out of my car and moved closer, using the shadows to my advantage. I found a spot by the window, the curtains barely drawn. Through the gap, I saw them. Lisa and Greg were already on the couch, entangled in each other. It was like a scene from a movie, only this was my life being shattered in real time. Viewers began to join the live stream, comments flooding in with a mix of shock, sympathy, and morbid curiosity. The viewer count climbed rapidly, friends, family, even strangers, all witnessing my wife's betrayal. Each new comment was a nail in the coffin of my marriage, sealing its fate. The emotional turmoil was overwhelming. Part of me wanted to burst in, to scream and confront them both. But another part, a darker part, relished the public exposure, the ultimate act of revenge. Lisa had humiliated me in private. Now, I was doing the same to her in the most public way possible. Minutes felt like hours as I stood there, filming. Eventually, the guilt began to creep in, but the anger kept it at bay. I knew there was no turning back. This was the point of no return, and I was ready to face whatever came next. As the broadcast continued, I ended it with one final shot. Lisa and Greg, lost in their deceit, oblivious to the world watching them. After witnessing Lisa and Greg together, I drove home in a daze, my mind racing. My phone buzzed incessantly with notifications from the live broadcast. I ignored them, the screen reflecting my disheveled face in the dark. When I finally pulled into the driveway, I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the house that no longer felt like a home. Inside, I paced the living room, the events replaying in my mind. It wasn't enough to just catch them in the act. I needed to make sure there were consequences. Public humiliation was a start, but it didn't feel like enough. I needed to hit Lisa where it hurt, to make her feel the same pain she had inflicted on me. First, I deactivated the live stream and archived the video. I knew it would be valuable later, both as evidence and as a tool for my plan. The comments and reactions from the viewers had already spread the news, but I wanted more. I needed to make sure the betrayal was impossible to ignore. I spent the next few hours drafting a carefully worded email, attaching the video, and sending it to everyone in our social circle. Friends, family, Lisa's parents, and even a few acquaintances. The subject line read, "The truth about Lisa and Greg." As I hit send, a wave of grim satisfaction washed over me. This was just the beginning. Next, I planned the confrontation. I knew Lisa would come home late, as she always did on these nights. I decided to wait up for her, to confront her as soon as she walked through the door. I rehearsed my words, the accusations, the questions, the demands. I wanted her to squirm, to see the hurt and anger in my eyes. The hours crawled by, the anticipation building with each tick of the clock. Finally, I heard her car in the driveway. My heart pounded as the front door opened, and Lisa stepped inside, her face glowing with an unnatural happiness that made my blood boil. She froze when she saw me, the smile fading as she took in my expression. "John, what are you doing up?" she asked, her voice tinged with unease. I stood, the laptop open on the coffee table. The video paused at the most incriminating moment. "We need to talk," I said, my voice cold and steady. "About this." I hit play, and Lisa's eyes widened in horror as she watched herself with Greg, the color draining from her face. She looked at me, her mouth opening and closing, searching for words that wouldn't come. The confrontation had begun, and there was no turning back. I planned to take her through every emotion I had felt: shock, disbelief, hurt, and anger. I wanted her to understand the depth of her betrayal. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. For 30 years, I had been faithful, loving, and supportive. Now, I would show her what it felt like to be utterly betrayed by the person you trusted most. The night stretched on as we argued, accusations flying back and forth. She denied, then admitted, then pleaded for forgiveness. But I was resolute. The plan was in motion, and nothing she said could change that. By the time dawn broke, our marriage was in tatters, and the path forward was clear. Lisa would face the consequences of her actions, and I would see to it that justice was served. The night of the confrontation left me emotionally drained, but also strangely invigorated. Lisa's denials had turned to tearful confessions, and she begged for a second chance. But the betrayal was too deep, the wounds too fresh. I couldn't just forgive and forget. I needed to see it through, to ensure that there were real consequences for her actions. The next morning, I woke up to a flurry of messages. The email I had sent out had done its job. Friends and family were in shock, bombarding me with questions and expressing their disbelief. It was clear that the video had made an impact. Lisa's parents, who had always seen her as the perfect daughter, were devastated. The betrayal wasn't just mine to bear anymore. It had rippled out, affecting everyone around us. Lisa was still in the house, a shell of her former self. She moved around silently, her face pale and eyes red from crying. I watched her from a distance, feeling a mix of satisfaction and pity. The woman I had loved for 30 years was now a stranger, and the trust we had built was shattered beyond repair. That evening, as I sat in the living room, the doorbell rang. It was Greg. He had the audacity to show up at my doorstep, his face a mix of defiance and regret. I opened the door, my fists clenched at my sides. "We need to talk," he said, his voice steady but his eyes betraying his unease. "There's nothing to talk about," I replied, my voice cold. "You've done enough." He stepped inside, and I led him to the living room. Lisa appeared in the doorway, her eyes widening when she saw Greg. For a moment, there was silence, the tension thick in the air. Then, Greg spoke.
"John, I'm sorry."
"I never meant for this to happen. It just did."
"Sorry?"
I scoffed. "You think a simple apology is going to fix this?" Lisa stepped forward, her voice trembling. "John, please. Let's talk this through. We can fix this." "Fix this?" I echoed, incredulous. "There's no fixing this, Lisa. You destroyed our marriage. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it." Greg tried to interject, but I silenced him with a glare. "You too, Greg. You were my friend. How could you do this?" He had no answer, his silence speaking volumes. The weight of their betrayal hung heavy in the room, suffocating any chance of reconciliation. I turned to Lisa, my voice steady but my heart breaking. "I want you to pack your things and leave. We're done." Lisa's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, defeated. Greg stood there, looking like he wanted to say something but thought better of it. As Lisa disappeared to gather her belongings, I faced Greg one last time. "You need to leave, too. And don't ever come back." Greg nodded, a look of regret flashing across his face before he turned and walked out the door. Lisa followed shortly after, her suitcase in hand, eyes downcast. She paused at the door, looking back at me one last time. "John, I'm so sorry," she whispered. But it was too late. The betrayal was complete, and there was no going back. I watched as she left, closing the door behind her. The house was silent once more, but the echoes of their betrayal lingered, a painful reminder of the life we once had. I sat down, the weight of it all crashing down on me. There was no satisfaction in this, only a deep, aching void. The betrayal had torn my life apart, and now I had to find a way to pick up the pieces and move on. The night after Lisa and Greg left, I found myself unable to sleep. The house felt emptier than ever, every corner a reminder of the life we'd built and the betrayal that had shattered it. I paced the living room, the echoes of our argument still fresh in my mind. I knew I needed to do something more, something that would ensure this betrayal was never forgotten. My phone buzzed with notifications, reminders of the live broadcast from the night before. I picked it up, scrolling through the comments. Friends, family, and strangers had all witnessed the most intimate and painful moment of my life, and they wanted more. The messages ranged from sympathy to outright schadenfreude, but one thing was clear. People were captivated by my story. In a moment of clarity, I decided to do another live broadcast. This time, it wasn't just about catching Lisa and Greg in the act. It was about telling my side of the story, reclaiming control over the narrative. I sat down in my recliner, the soft glow of the lamp casting long shadows on the walls, and hit the Go Live button. "Hey everyone," I began, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "It's John again. I know a lot of you saw what happened last night, and I appreciate the support and the kind words. But there's more to this story than just one night of betrayal." As the viewer count climbed, I recounted the events leading up to that fateful night. I talked about Lisa's sudden changes, the guarded phone, and the moment I discovered the messages from Greg. I laid it all bare, sparing no details. The comments flooded in, a mix of shock, outrage, and support. It felt cathartic, like I was finally reclaiming a piece of my dignity. Then I addressed the aftermath. Lisa and Greg are gone now. They've left, and I'm here, trying to make sense of it all. I know some of you might think what I did was extreme, broadcasting it live like that. But when you're hurt and betrayed by the people you trust the most, you don't think straight. You just want the world to know your pain. The support was overwhelming. People shared their own stories of betrayal, creating a community of empathy and understanding. It was strange, finding solace in the virtual company of strangers, but it helped. It made me feel less alone in my suffering. I ended the broadcast with a promise. I'm not sure what the future holds, but I know one thing. I'll get through this. And if any of you are going through something similar, know that you're not alone. We'll get through this together. As I signed off, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The broadcast had given me a sense of closure, a way to process my pain and begin to heal. It wasn't just about the betrayal anymore. It was about finding a way forward. The outpouring of support gave me hope, a small glimmer of light in the darkness. The house was still and quiet, but it no longer felt as suffocating. I had faced the betrayal head-on, shared my story with the world, and emerged stronger for it. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was ready to face whatever came next, one step at a time. The days following the broadcast were a whirlwind of emotions and events. I had expected some backlash, but I was unprepared for the sheer magnitude of it all. My phone buzzed nonstop with messages, calls, and social media notifications. The video had gone viral, reaching far beyond our small community. Strangers from all over the country were tuning in, sharing their thoughts, and offering support. Lisa's parents were among the first to reach out. They were devastated, struggling to reconcile the daughter they knew with the woman in the video. They called me, their voices trembling with emotion, asking what had gone wrong and how they could help. It was a difficult conversation, filled with tears and unresolved questions. They loved Lisa, but they couldn't condone what she had done. Meanwhile, the community response was mixed. Some neighbors avoided me, uncomfortable with the public nature of the scandal. Others approached me with a newfound sense of camaraderie, sharing their own experiences of betrayal and offering words of encouragement. It was strange how something so personal had become a public spectacle, but it also brought a sense of solidarity I hadn't anticipated. Work was another story. I had retired a few years ago, but the auto shop where I'd spent decades was still a part of my life. My former colleagues reached out, some expressing shock and others offering to grab a beer and talk. It felt good to know they had my back, but the pity in their eyes was hard to stomach. One morning, as I sipped my coffee and scrolled through the endless stream of messages, there was a knock on the door. It was Lisa. She looked exhausted, her eyes red and puffy from crying. For a moment, I felt a pang of the old affection, but it was quickly overshadowed by the hurt and betrayal. "John, can we talk?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I stepped aside, letting her in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we had shared so many meals and conversations. She started to speak, but I held up a hand. "Lisa, I don't think there's anything left to say. You made your choices, and now we're dealing with the consequences." Tears streamed down her face as she nodded. "I know, John. I'm so sorry for everything. I never meant to hurt you like this." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. "I appreciate that, but sorry isn't enough. You need to understand that you destroyed our marriage, our trust. There's no going back from this." We talked for hours, rehashing the past, the decisions that led us here, and the future. By the end, it was clear that there was no salvaging what we had. The love we once shared was buried under a mountain of hurt and betrayal. Lisa left, a finality in her step that told me this was truly the end. As the days turned into weeks, I began to find a new rhythm. The support from strangers and friends alike was a lifeline, helping me navigate the emotional wreckage. I started focusing on myself, picking up old hobbies, and reconnecting with people I had lost touch with. The house felt different now, less like a prison of memories and more like a place where I could rebuild. The aftermath of the betrayal was painful, but it also brought a strange sense of liberation. I was free to start anew, to forge a new path unburdened by the weight of a broken marriage. In the quiet moments, I still felt the sting of what had happened, but each day it lessened. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, it felt like it held possibilities instead of just regrets. The aftermath of Lisa's betrayal had torn my life apart, but it also gave me a chance to piece it back together in a way that was stronger and more resilient. The confrontation with Greg had been inevitable, and it came sooner than I had expected. One crisp afternoon, as I was busy fixing up an old motorcycle in my garage, a hobby that had become my solace, Greg pulled up in his flashy sports car. The sight of him stepping out, looking contrite yet defiant, made my blood boil. I wiped my greasy hands on a rag and stepped outside, standing my ground as he approached. "John, we need to talk," he began, his voice steady but his eyes betraying a hint of fear. "Talk? After what you did, you think talking will fix anything?" I retorted, my voice barely containing the anger bubbling beneath the surface. Greg took a deep breath. "I know I messed up. I never meant for it to go this far. I don't know what happened." His words were hollow, meaningless. The rage I had kept bottled up since the betrayal now surged forward, unstoppable. "You don't know what happened? You seduced my wife, Greg. You betrayed our friendship, our trust. You don't just not know how that happens." He tried to step closer, but I held up a hand, stopping him in his tracks. "Stay right there. You don't get to come any closer," I warned, my voice low and dangerous. Greg's shoulders slumped, but he didn't leave.
John, I'm sorry.
"I really am. But you have to understand, it wasn't just about you. Lisa, she was unhappy. We both were. It just happened." I clenched my fists, the urge to hit him almost overpowering. "So that's your excuse? You were unhappy, so you decided to destroy 2 lives? That's pathetic, Greg." The confrontation was heating up, each word fueling the fire inside me. Greg's remorseful expression did little to soothe my anger. "I came here to make things right," he pleaded. "To apologize." "Apologize?" I spat. "There's no making this right. You've wrecked everything. You can't just waltz in here and expect a few sorries to fix it." His face fell, the weight of his actions finally seeming to dawn on him. "What do you want me to do, John? Tell me, and I'll do it." I took a step closer, my voice a harsh whisper. "I want you to disappear. I want you to stay away from me, from Lisa. I don't ever want to see your face again." Greg nodded slowly, realizing that there was no redemption to be found here. "Okay, I understand. I'll go." He turned and walked back to his car, a defeated man. As he drove away, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, relief, and an odd sense of closure. The confrontation had been necessary, a final nail in the coffin of a friendship that had been poisoned by betrayal. I went back to the garage, the familiar smell of oil and metal a comforting reminder of simpler times. The confrontation with Greg had been the last major hurdle. With him out of the picture, I could focus on moving forward, on rebuilding my life without the shadow of betrayal looming over me. The days that followed were a blur of activity. I threw myself into my hobbies, reconnecting with old friends and making new ones. The confrontation with Greg had given me a sense of finality, allowing me to truly begin the process of healing. In the end, the confrontation had been more than just a heated exchange. It had been a necessary step in reclaiming my life. I was no longer the man defined by betrayal and loss. I was John, a man with a future to look forward to, and for the first time in a long while, that future looked bright. As the dust began to settle from the confrontation with Greg, the reality of the situation became clearer. Lisa and I had built a life together, intertwined not just emotionally but legally. Our assets, our home, our finances, all of it needed to be unraveled. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was determined to see it through. I contacted a divorce lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Janet who came highly recommended. During our first meeting, she laid everything out plainly. Divorces are rarely clean or simple, especially with infidelity involved. "But we'll get through this, John," she assured me, her demeanor both professional and empathetic. The legal process began in earnest. Papers were filed, and the wheels of justice turned slowly. Lisa, to her credit, didn't contest the divorce. She seemed to understand the gravity of her actions, agreeing to an uncontested divorce to minimize further pain and suffering. But even with her cooperation, there were still countless details to sort through. Dividing our assets was a painstaking process. The house, the cars, the savings, we had to account for everything. Janet was meticulous, ensuring that every T was crossed and every I dotted. She fought for my interests, making sure I wasn't left with the short end of the stick. Still, the process was emotionally draining. each discussion and decision a reminder of the life we were dismantling. During one of our meetings, Janet looked up from her notes, her expression serious. "John, we need to discuss the video you broadcast. It's gone viral, and it could potentially affect the proceedings." I had almost forgotten about the video in the midst of everything else. "What do you mean?" I asked, suddenly anxious. "Lisa's attorney might argue that the public humiliation caused her emotional distress. It could influence the settlement," Janet explained. I felt a pang of guilt but quickly brushed it aside. "She betrayed me, Janet. The world deserved to know." "I understand, but the legal system doesn't always see things that way. We need to be prepared for that argument." Despite this potential complication, we pressed on. Lisa's attorney did bring up the broadcast, but Janet countered effectively, arguing that the video was a direct result of Lisa's actions and the emotional turmoil they caused me. In the end, the judge seemed to sympathize with my plight, ruling that while the broadcast was unconventional, it was understandable given the circumstances. After months of back and forth, court dates, and mediation sessions, the divorce was finalized. The judge's gavel came down with a decisive thud, signaling the end of our marriage. Lisa and I exchanged a brief, poignant look in the courtroom. There was no hatred, no more anger, just a profound sadness for what had been lost. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, yes, but also an emptiness. 30 years of marriage, reduced to legal documents and divided assets. It was a sobering reminder of how quickly life could change. The legal battle had been exhausting, but it also provided a sense of closure. It was the final step in a long, painful journey. Now, with the divorce behind me, I could focus on rebuilding my life. The legal battle was over, and I was ready to move forward, carrying the lessons learned and the scars earned as I stepped into a future of my own making. As I drove home, the weight of the past months began to lift. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to shape. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of hope. The legal battle had been a necessary struggle, but now, finally, I was free to start anew. The weeks following the finalization of the divorce were both liberating and sobering. For the first time in decades, I found myself alone in the house that Lisa and I had made a home. The silence was deafening at first, but gradually, I began to appreciate the peace it brought. It was a stark contrast to the chaos of the past months, and it gave me the space I needed to reflect on everything that had happened. Each morning, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise and pondering the twists and turns that had led me here. I thought about the early days of our marriage, when Lisa and I were young and in love, full of dreams and aspirations. We had built a life together, faced challenges, and celebrated successes. Those memories were now bittersweet, tinged with the betrayal that had ultimately torn us apart. I realized that part of my healing process involved accepting my own role in the deterioration of our marriage. It was easy to blame Lisa and Greg for their actions, but I couldn't ignore the fact that our relationship had been strained long before the affair. The distance that had grown between us, the unspoken resentments, and the lack of communication had all contributed to the breakdown. In some ways, the affair was a symptom of deeper issues that we had failed to address. One day, as I sorted through old photos, I came across a picture of Lisa and me from our honeymoon. We looked so happy, so full of promise. I held the photo for a long time, reflecting on the journey from that moment to where we were now. It was a painful reminder of what we had lost, but it also highlighted the good times we had shared. I began to focus on the positives, the lessons learned from the experience. I had discovered a strength within myself that I didn't know existed. The ordeal had taught me the importance of communication, trust, and self-respect. It had shown me that I could endure immense pain and come out the other side stronger and more resilient. Reconnecting with old friends and making new ones became a crucial part of my healing. They provided a support system that helped me navigate the emotional ups and downs. I also found solace in my hobbies, working on motorcycles, hiking, and even picking up painting, something I hadn't done since my youth. These activities gave me a sense of purpose and helped me channel my emotions into something creative and constructive. One evening, as I sat in my garage surrounded by tools and the comforting smell of motor oil, I realized that I had finally reached a point of acceptance. The anger and bitterness had faded, replaced by a sense of peace. The betrayal had been a devastating blow, but it had also been a catalyst for change. It had forced me to confront my own shortcomings and to grow as a person. I knew that the road ahead would still have its challenges, but I felt ready to face them. I was no longer defined by the betrayal or the divorce. I was John, a man who had been through hell and back, but who had emerged with a renewed sense of purpose and a heart ready to heal. As I looked out at the setting sun, I felt a sense of closure. The reflection on the past had given me clarity, and I was ready to embrace the future. The journey had been long and painful, but it had also been transformative. And for that, I was grateful. With the past finally behind me, I embarked on a journey to rebuild my life. The process was slow but intentional, each step carefully considered. I decided it was time to leave the house that held so many memories, both good and bad. It was a difficult decision, but necessary for my healing. I put it on the market and began searching for a new place, somewhere to start fresh. I found a quaint cottage on the outskirts of town. It was smaller, but cozy and surrounded by nature. The minute I saw it, I knew it was the perfect place to begin my new chapter. The move was a whirlwind of activity, packing up 3 decades of life and memories. But as I unpacked in my new home, I felt a sense of liberation. This was my space, my sanctuary. Settling in, I threw myself into new projects. The cottage had a neglected garden that I decided to revitalize. Each morning, I would wake up early, eager to get my hands dirty and see the transformation take place. There was something profoundly therapeutic about nurturing new life, watching it grow and flourish under my care. It was a metaphor for my own journey. I also reconnected with my love for painting. I converted a small room into a studio, filling it with canvases, brushes, and paints. I would spend hours lost in the process, expressing my emotions through colors and strokes. It was a form of meditation, a way to process everything that had happened and find peace. My social life began to blossom as well. I joined a local hiking group and a community art class. These activities introduced me to new people, each with their own stories and experiences. We bonded over shared interests and the simple joys of life. It felt good to be part of a community again, to build new relationships based on mutual respect and understanding. One evening, at a community art show, I met someone who would change my life in unexpected ways. Her name was Claire, a warm and vibrant woman with a passion for life that was contagious. We struck up a conversation about art, and it felt like we had known each other for years. Over time, our friendship deepened, evolving into something more. Claire was different from Lisa in every way. She was open, honest, and supportive. She had her own past, her own scars, but she faced life with a resilience and positivity that inspired me. Being with her was easy, natural. We spent countless hours talking, laughing, and exploring new places together. She brought a sense of joy and excitement back into my life that I hadn't felt in years. As our relationship grew, I realized that my heart was healing. The pain of the past was fading, replaced by a newfound hope for the future. Claire and I took things slowly, savoring each moment and building a foundation based on trust and mutual respect. She understood my journey and supported me every step of the way. The new beginning wasn't just about finding love again. It was about rediscovering myself, my passions, and my purpose. It was about embracing life with all its uncertainties and possibilities. The betrayal and the heartbreak had been painful, but they had also led me to this point, a place of peace, growth, and happiness. Looking back, I could see the path clearly. Each step, each struggle had been necessary. It had shaped me, strengthened me, and brought me to a place where I could truly appreciate the beauty of a new beginning. The future was bright, and I was ready to embrace it with an open heart and a resilient spirit.